Well, greetings everyone, and welcome again to Tula's Tips for Caregivers. I am so happy to come to you each week and bring a special guest each week to highlight yet another aspect of caregiving. As we all know, there are over 44 million caregivers in the United States, and 70% of us work full-time and go home and care for an aging loved one, usually to the tune of about 24 hours a week. So I've been doing this radio show now since 2010 to come to caregivers in our nation and across the world really now to help you, to give you advice, to give you some tips on how to take care of yourself, and hopefully to be resourceful and supportive. One of the aspects of caregiving that isn't talked about a whole lot is life after caregiving. When you lose your loved one and you're grieving. So that's what we're going to talk about today. My special guest today is Rachel Weinstein. She's the coordinator of community engagement and education at Baptist Health System's AgeWell Center for Senior Health. She's got a bachelor's degree in applied science with a master's degree in education with a specialty in counseling for those who are grieving. That is her area of passion. She specializes in the areas of grief, loss, and life transition. She worked in California for many years as a general psychotherapist, and then she moved to Florida in 2014 to be near her own family. She lives here and works here. She's a proud partner, sister, aunt, and daughter. And today we're going to talk to her a little bit about grief. Welcome to my show, Rachel.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
I'm glad you're a part of this show today. You know, this is a topic nobody wants to talk about. It's a hard topic to talk about.
It's true. Grief is something that most people think is off limits when it comes to an open discussion. And part of my passion is shedding light on things that tend to be in the dark. Most of us have a lot of need that we have challenges being met.
Well, you know, I believe that grief is a journey that shouldn't be walked alone.
Agreed.
You can't do it alone.
That's right.
It's too painful. You need somebody to walk alongside you and support you and someone to talk to. So you're going to be that person today for some of my listeners. You're going to help them understand some of the components of grief. So let's talk about what's one of the most misunderstood aspects of grief.
There are several. One of the biggest, most commonly misunderstood aspects of grief is that people think of it as an event when in fact it's a process. Grief is not just something that you have an experience of, and then it gets better. It's not a linear process. It has peaks and valleys. It's much more like a spiral than it is something that could be put on a graph going from the bottom left corner to the top right corner in some kind of nice, neat, and orderly fashion. So the most misunderstood is that grief really is a process. And I think the second most misunderstood aspect of grief is that it only has to do with death and dying. Mm-hmm. And when in fact, grief is a natural and normal response to any loss or change that's significant to us. So that means that sometimes it's related to physical death. Sometimes it's a loss of a role that we've always played. Sometimes it's a loss of our own health or the loss of a loved one. My own father, for example, who's now passed away, when he was diagnosed with dementia, I went through many dimensions of grief in the 8 years that it took him from the diagnosis to the end of his life, just moving through all of the losses that came along with that diagnosis, from knowing that he was going to get worse to experiencing the first bout of incontinence with my lovely dignified father, or the first time he didn't recognize me. So many firsts that were just stabs to the heart when it came to pain. And I think that if more people could understand that it's not just a physical passing, that inspires the grief process, but it's any kind of significant loss or change. Pets are included.
Oh, yeah.
It may be one thing that I talk with a lot of people about who come to see me is the relationship they had to the person. If I told you, for example, that I lost my neighbor, you may assume that we had a certain relationship that may be more surface, but what if that neighbor was much more like my mom? What if that neighbor served as a surrogate mom to me for years and years? And that relationship was so significant to me that you shouldn't possibly make an assumption based upon just a title, a cousin, an aunt, a neighbor, a friend. Really is much more about what that relationship meant to you and what it was like.
Depth
That's
of the
right.
relationship.
That's
and
right.
the love
That's
that
right.
you had for that person. And the more you loved a person, the more you grieved
Exactly.
their loss.
They say that grief is the price that we pay for loving and investing, and it's directly proportionate. The amount of pain that we feel is connected to the level of investment that we had, how hard we loved. There is just no getting away from that experience of
I read a
intensity.
saying once that goes kind of like this. Grief is the last act of love for those we loved. Where there is deep grief, there's deep love. And it kind of well sums it up, doesn't it?
It does. And it brings to mind something that that I think about quite often, is that sometimes people who are grieving, who are hurting, are afraid that letting go of the pain means letting go of the person or the love, when in truth, that's not the case. As you grieve, you're going to have, the body needs, and it's a natural experience, to have periods of peace, relief, joy. Those moments are intertwined in our daily life, whether we are grieving or not. Nothing can be constant and just unyielding. So you're going to have, your body needs to have some kind of reprieve, respite, relief from the heaviness. And some people feel awfully guilty when that happens, if they catch themselves laughing or having a good time, or, oh my gosh, I haven't thought about my loved one it all for an hour, or all day, or whatever.
Yeah.
That recognition sometimes can be jarring, and people can really judge themselves harshly, when in truth, it's a natural, normal process.
It is.
And so pain is not the only way to love and honor somebody.
Hopefully you can still enjoy their memories, laugh about the funny times you had with them. That's all a part of remembering and honoring your loved one.
But those things do come, and they come a little more easily with some time as a buffer.
There is that old saying that time heals all wounds. It doesn't completely heal the wound of the death of a loved one, but over time it most definitely lessens, in my view.
Right.
It's not as often, it's not as frequent, and it's not to the great depth.
Right.
It's not as raw.
Right. A loss is a loss for a lifetime, and you come to know what they call a new normal.
Yeah.
After a significant loss, time does transform and soften. I like to put it, soften the grief experience. It doesn't take it away.
It never completely goes away for somebody you loved. Let's talk about some of the ways that grief impacts us. I know how grief is impacting me right now. But let's talk about, physically and spiritually and psychologically. How does grief impact a person?
Well, first of all, I like to use an acronym that is called PIES, as though you're saying coconut cream pies, PIES. It's a shortcut. Each letter of PIES spells out a way that grief impacts us. The common ways are physically, that's the P, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah.
So I can talk a little bit about each of those ways, but grief impacts us in each of those ways, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. So physically, the body doesn't know the difference between a physical trauma and an emotional one. So much like when you, let's say you have the flu, and you are so tired because your body is telling you that you must rest in order to heal.
Right.
Fatigue is one of the most common expressions of grief. It's a physiological experience of fatigue. And that doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you sleep more, but it certainly means you're exhausted. You feel exhausted. And so that's one common way that grief presents itself physically. As well, stomach aches, headaches. Some of that can be from a lot of crying, although not everybody, especially if the loss was sudden and you're still very shocked. Not everybody cries, but, or at least initially. But headaches are common. Like I mentioned, fatigue, stomach upset, chest pain. Believe it or not, heartbreak can manifest
physical chest
That's
pain.
Right. And I will say this, that when you're experiencing grief, if you're experiencing physical symptoms and you're not sure if this is a side effect of grief, a symptom of grief or not, please do see your doctor to at least find out what may be happening. But let your doctor know as well that you're going through, you're experiencing loss, and just get an A-OK from your physician. But that aside, some other ways that I can think of that there are some physical impacts. You may have, let's see, stomach aches, headaches, fatigue. Those are the main ones. Dry mouth is really common. Yawning frequently. You need more oxygen as you grieve, so you'll find yourself yawning more often.
Or sighing deeply, involuntary sighing.
Exactly.
I know that because all kinds of stress impacts your body and your immune system, grief most definitely impacts your immune system. And I myself have done this, and have seen so many other people 3 to 4 or 5 weeks after the loss of their loved one come down with a serious sickness. Yeah, it just makes sense.
Stress will lower your, will compromise your immune system, coupled with the fact that you're not typically getting restorative sleep.
Right.
All of those things combined will ripen you for catching all kinds of bugs. And sometimes, what you don't give yourself voluntarily, you'll be forced to receive if you are. You have to miss work, and you have to do nothing but rest. So what you won't give yourself, your body will eventually
make you give yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the things that are physical. Intellectually, one of the most common presentations is confusion and forgetfulness. I hear a lot of stories about people losing things, losing their keys, for missing exits on the freeway. You simply, all of your effort, all of your energy is being spent on healing and grieving, and everything else is extra. So all of the details that you would normally be able to keep in your head and be sharp and on top of it, they're going to go by the wayside in grief. And not just for a day or two. I'm talking about for quite a while. So those are just some of the ways intellectually that you can be impacted. Of course, emotionally, depression. And that does not, for some people they think of sadness and crying, but depression can also present as irritability. You can feel angry, irritable, anxious. These are some of the emotional aspects of that acronym of PIES. And then spiritually, what I want to say is that whether or not you have a strong faith, whether or not you have always been a believer in within your religion, grief will find a way to challenge what you've always believed. You're either going to find yourself leaning more into your faith, or have a real crisis of faith where you feel like perhaps what you've always believed, you're starting to question. Why would God let this happen? How could God allow this to happen? Why did my loved one have to suffer? Why am I suffering? And that kind of grappling with spirituality is very common. So there are so many other things, but to summarize what's involved in that acronym, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, we absolutely are impacted in those ways, and many more.
And many more.
Grief.
Yeah.
presents itself.
It can't help but impact you.
That's right.
Particularly if you've lost somebody you really loved.
That's
so let's
right.
talk about managing some of those things we talked enough a little bit, I think, about rest and the importance of rest on the physical aspects of it. But how do we manage some of the, say, for instance, intellectual things? How do we help train ourselves if you find yourself getting more and more forgetful or having what I call brain grief fog?
Well, the first way in which you can manage it is to treat yourself gently and kindly, just as you would a friend or a loved one. So don't forget that when you're trying to strategize about ways that you can support yourself, that you think of yourself as you would a loved one. And typically we're a lot kinder with other people than we are with ourselves, especially if we are caregivers. In terms of genders, women are classic about putting ourselves last, moms especially. So making sure that just approaching this question about what to do, that you're just looking at it from the aspect of, I want to make sure that I'm being kind and gentle with myself. And what that looks like, well, first and foremost, making sure that you are allowing yourself the opportunity to grieve. And that means setting aside some time when you devote whatever you need to do to be able to express the way you're feeling. A lot of us have lots going on outside of our grief experience. We are family members, spouses, employees, and we have all of these real-world tasks to complete. If we know that we have promised ourselves, and we have to sometimes schedule it, a time to just completely unplug. Maybe it's going to your car where nobody else can hear you, rolling up the windows and allowing yourself to cry, to scream, to talk to your loved one out loud in a way that nobody is going to think you're crazy. It's just you. Please remember to roll up your windows in your car if you do this. But it sounds a little silly, but really genuinely allowing yourself that time and that space to just be the way you feel.
You have to feel it. You have to go through feeling it.
You know, the question I get a lot sometimes is if someone isn't showing outwardly their grief, or if it's not looking to other people like they think it should look, that they're not, quote-unquote, dealing with it. In truth, they are dealing with it. That's the way they are grieving right now, to feel disconnected, to feel numb. The body literally can't take on more than it can handle. So
it's a self-protection mechanism.
Absolutely, and it's normal. So there's I think of all the misunderstandings, if I could go back to that first question about one of the biggest misunderstandings, it's that there's a right and a wrong way to grieve. So to get back to the question about what you can actually do, first, approach yourself as you would a loving friend. Treat yourself kindly and gently. 2, allow yourself, literally, carve out that time on a daily basis to give yourself permission to grieve as you are, just as you are. There's no prescription about what to do during that time, just to be authentic. Because we have to wear so many masks during our day, our society just demands that, even the question about how are you doing, most people ask that praying that you're going to say fine or better.
Right.
And
they don't really want to hear.
No, they really don't. I mean, even if you say, well, okay, the look on the other person's face, if you hesitate before saying fine, if you say with a little bit of inflection, like maybe that's not true, it's kind of like you see a little panic, like, uh-oh, don't be too real, I don't have time for it.
There's only a few people in your life that you can really give that real answer to.
Right.
The closest friends and family that really are concerned and want to know.
Exactly.
It's not everybody in your day-to-day.
That's right. And it actually brings me to the third point about what you can do. The temptation, I want to say, share with people that you're going through something difficult. And that is true. I do want to encourage people to be honest, even if you're being brief, about the fact that you're going through a difficult time. Yeah. I say that, though, with some real-world input here, because we don't have a culture that supports vulnerability and people well-meaning people, close, dear loved ones and friends, literally don't know what to do with our pain. It can scare people, especially people who care deeply about us.
Yeah.
So the third thing I want to mention to do to manage grief is to find an objective support person, somebody who... Therapists are wonderful, and they have many places. Not every single therapist is trained to really know how to support grief. So find somebody who is especially trained in working with grief to be able to support you in your journey. Because when the people closest to you experience your pain, it can scare them. They don't know what to say. They sometimes can come across as being short with you because they're simply uncomfortable with your pain and they want it to be better for you, and so it can almost come out like they're annoyed with you. I've had that experience myself. When in truth what's happening is they hate seeing you suffer. They don't know what to do, and that frustration in being powerless over changing it can come out like it's directed at you. So find a person who can be with you through that journey, who's objective enough to not be tangled up in the grief with you, or experiencing grief themselves about the loss, and support you as long as it takes without being tired of the details. In fact, wanting to hear those details, that is, that's imperative. It's really,
and we'll
really
put
important.
a time limit on it for you. You know, those people who say, oh, you know, it's been 6 months. Come on.
Right.
Enough of that, you know.
Ironically, when as someone who supports grief professionally, not in my my daytime job at AgeWell, but my practice is after hours and on weekends. For years, I've supported people in grief, and most of those people come to me 6 months to a year or longer after a loss, for lots of reasons. In part, lots of reasons. The main one being that initially, there are a lot of people who are remembering that they're going through the loss and checking in on them and asking about them. It's when those people go away, when the bereavement leave is over, which is 3 days, as you know, which typically is crazy. It's when everyone else kind of forgets about it, and they're expected to be back full tilt, in their life, that people feel like, wait a minute, I'm not okay.
Yeah, and how's everybody else in this world going along with their day-to-day activities?
Exactly.
And so well and smiling and doing so good.
Yeah.
And, hey, here I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So ironically, I don't typically see people. It happens, but typically people come to me about 6 months or longer after a loss.
Sometimes it may take that long to really get through the shock, sometimes the business part that you have to do when you lose a loved one keeps you so busy.
That's right.
For a while, you don't have time to sit and really think about your loss.
Yes.
But then when all of that has faded away and the people have gone away and it's just you, then it does often take that long, and then you feel it.
Exactly.
So I'm glad there are bereavement counselors like you to help people.
It's a privilege.
This show is for caregivers. As you know, caregivers of frail elders.
That's right.
And so how are caregivers' needs, do they grieve in a different way? How are their needs unique?
Caregivers have a really complex process when it comes to grief, in part because their experience of grief can be complicated by some degree of relief.
Sure.
Relief over, it sounds awful to say the word relief, because all of us would trade
anything to have them back.
Anything to have them back.
Right.
But the experience of not having the part of caregiving that, let's face it, is so incredibly challenging.
Taxing.
Absolutely. Having that part done with, can be a relief. And then they feel incredibly guilty.
Because they feel that relief, and you become this circle.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's silly to feel guilty for feeling the relief. The relief you feel is from the functions of caregiving, the tasks that you had to carry out day in and day out to make sure that your loved one had the best of everything, was well cared for.
Right.
it's not relief that they're gone. It's
Right.
relief from all of the
Right.
tasks.
And the burden of anticipation, the burden of the anticipation of not knowing what their loved one's next need was going to be, the worst case scenarios that are constantly playing out in a caregiver's mind about what could happen or what
Right.
will happen if and when, you fill in the blank, if and
Yeah.
when X, Y, or Z occurs, that's now it's the worst has happened.
Yeah.
Your loved one has passed, and now what? So I say now what, meaning that all of those details with which caregivers busy themselves have to be busied every day are done. And
Right.
when the spotlight's back on you, now what do I need? Caregivers aren't typically used to paying attention to what
themselves,
they need.
right.
That's right. So
And
that's
it's a new world.
unique concern. There are a lot of
Yeah.
other things that are not unique to caregivers that are involved in healing with grief, but that's one that comes to mind, is that the mixed bag that's involved in the emotional experience after a loss, including the guilt and the relief. So that's one. And the other, and you've alluded to it, is that there are still so many details to have to go through, and
Yeah.
it's alongside
Yeah.
having to be perhaps a spouse or a parent, a coworker, an employee.
While you're grieving.
Exactly. And it's very, very challenging. And a lot of times caregivers, it's assumed, other people assume that, all of that's done with. They don't realize how much they're still dealing with. I know you, my friend, are well acquainted with what I'm talking about. You talk about it at the Caregiver Coalition meetings all the time. I hear you discuss that caregiving doesn't end with a physical
Death of the love. No,
Right.
it doesn't.
Right.
It continues.
That's right.
One of the things I've heard so many times from caregivers when their loved one died that really saddens me is, I don't know who I am anymore now that I'm not a caregiver. The loss of that role is sometimes so profoundly deep. People
That's
just, they're lost. And a lot of that is because they didn't do anything else other
right.
than be a caregiver.
Right.
And so I've always encouraged people to not go to that place. Keep doing the things you love to do as much as you're able. I know it can be hard and challenging sometimes, but try to do that and maintain your other relationships. Don't let go of those, because when your loved one passes and then all of a sudden you want to try to reach out and reacquaint or renew those relationships, it's going to be kind of hard. And you need them while you're caregiving, and you're going to need friends need each other, period.
That's right.
Before, during, and after. So
That's right.
I can't emphasize that enough. So you've lost your loved one and you've lost a role.
That's absolutely right. And that's another unique aspect of being a caregiver when it comes to grief, is that role that I first alluded to. It's not just a physical death, it's also the loss of a role.
Right.
And the role of caregiver is one of them. So who are we outside of
Right.
being caregivers? And who were we before we became caregivers?
And that's what's so important to remember. Let's talk about some of the things that people say sometimes when you know that they're trying to be helpful, but they're not. Sometimes they can even hurt you. What are
Right.
some of those things, and how can we talk to people and make
gosh.
that better?
There are so many.
There
I can
are.
tell you, I have some, and I say this carefully because the sad part about this is that we really can't fault people for saying things that don't feel good to us, because nobody teaches us what to say. Even though, ironically to me, I've always found this to be rather incredible, that even though every single one of us on this planet are going to experience grief, nobody even begins to prepare us for the experience. Not that anything could prepare you in a way that would
No, but we won't
buffer
even
the
talk about it
experience.
in this
Right.
society.
Right.
The possibility of impending death.
That's right. So, the first one is a lot of people will say, "I'm sorry for your loss." Now, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with those words. The problem that I have with it is that it's said so often that it can sound just impersonal and distancing. First of all, I'm saying your loss. I'm sorry for your loss. It's already putting a division between you and me, your experience and my experience. It's much better to say, I'm so sorry. So sorry to hear that. And look the person in the eye. So, to address one of the things that your question, again, was around what
people say when they're trying to be helpful, but
thank you.
Sometimes they're just not.
That's right. So that's one of them.
Yeah.
And I always try to give with a criticism. I try to give a replacement.
Yeah.
So the replacement would simply to cut off half that sentence instead of saying I'm sorry for your loss. Just I'm sorry.
So sorry.
Period.
Yeah. People understand that.
That's right. And stop and look the person in the eye or touch the person's arm if it's appropriate. If they're if that's okay with them, or if your relationship is such that it would be appropriate to touch their hand, please do that. The other is to say, stay strong. Well, who defines what strength is? Strength to me is allowing yourself to express, to feel without anesthetizing yourself or distancing yourself from your experiencing, from your experience. So, the stay strong idea is
baloney.
Right. So that's another one. Instead, it would be. It's okay to not prescribe when you're talking to somebody. Nobody expects you to be able to fix it. There's nothing you can actually say, no wisdom you can impart to someone who's grieving that will alleviate their pain. So I would say first and foremost, just know that if you're the person trying to offer support to someone, nobody expects you to take it away for them.
They know it can't be. They just want you to care.
That's right.
And listen.
Right.
And maybe walk alongside, both literally and metaphorically. Just be there.
Right.
And show you care.
That's right. And by showing you care, you can do a lot of things. One is to, first of all, not ask, if you need anything, let me know. I'm here for you, let me know. Well, if you're in grief, first of all, you're so overwhelmed. You don't know what you need other than you want your loved one back.
Right.
Right. So barring that experience being possible, actually offer something. Either offer it or just do it.
Yeah.
So, for example, you look so I know how much you're hurting. May I stop by on Tuesday and give you a little bit of time for yourself while I make dinner for your family or watch your kids or allow you to nap or do an errand, whatever it is, make a specific offer, or maybe give them a limited choice like you would if you're trying to, let's say, help your child pick out an outfit. You don't say, what do you want to wear today? You'll say, do you want the blue shirt or the red shirt? Say, would it be more helpful for me to come and give you some time to rest? Or would it be better if I can pick up something from the store that you're out of? Or just do it.
Yeah.
Just order food, have it sent.
Yeah. Show
up and leave it on the doorstep. You don't have to go in and visit. Pick something, knowing the person, hopefully, and just do something.
But that would be meaningful to them.
Exactly. So those are a couple of examples of. If you're writing something down. If you're sending a card, what's nice to do is to write a specific memory that you have. If you didn't know the person, but you simply heard them speak about their loved one, you can mention a story that you remember them relaying. I remember you telling me the story of your dad when he, I know how much you loved your father. I heard you talk about him so often with such love,
Recount a memory.
Recount a memory. And let them know that you are thinking of them.
I've had a lot of friends do that in the loss and death of my father, and it's been really meaningful to me because what it has showed me is how much he meant to them.
Exactly.
And that just gave me a sweet joy.
Lovely.
That's a way that people can help someone who's grieving.
Absolutely. If you're talking to somebody in grief and you're brave enough to be honest with them, allow them to be honest with you, I should say, and they cry. It's not that you made them cry, it's that they felt comfortable and safe enough with you in order to let it out. And so don't be afraid of using the person's name. That's one thing that often goes away.
Yeah.
When we lose someone, people stop mentioning them or using their name as though it's going to be too
painful or whatever.
Painful.
Can't say it.
But that sweet sound is something you miss.
Mm-hmm.
People asking you directly, or tell me some stories about your dad. Or what was he... Boy, people get so afraid of landing on a topic that's very... clearly, it's going to be present in the person's mind who's grieving. People tiptoe around it or pretend like it's a loss all over again when that happens.
It is a loss all over again, and it's almost dishonoring the person. It's almost like you're not remembering them.
It's a lovely way to honor someone is to talk about their life.
Right, and how much they meant to you, and fun memories, and things like that.
Yeah, but our culture is typically very averse to going there, which is one of the privileges I get as someone who supports grief, is to elicit those stories. I want to hear the details. I want you to help me get to know that person and the relationship that you had. It's not a tool or a technique. It's a genuine interest in who was this person. Tell me about this relationship. And tell me about your world then, not just in your grief, but tell me about your world when this person was part of it.
That's a help in the grieving process. You've done that with me. And we've talked about wonderful memories with my dad. And you even had a few wonderful memories.
I did.
With my dad. And you sharing those with me has helped me. So I think that's really important. And you're the first grief counselor I've ever heard say, do that. That it's really important to do that. So let's talk for a minute and we'll wind up the show talking about how can a grief counselor help you? And then you've got to tell me how people can contact you. I don't want to leave this show without you giving your phone number, your email address, whatever you want to give, so that people who are listening and who are grieving the loss of a loved one can find you.
Of course. Well, I'll start with the first part of your question is how a grief counselor can help you. The first way a grief counselor can help you is to help you understand all of the natural and normal things that come with grief that nobody thinks of. Because while grief is a natural and normal process, it feels crazy.
Yeah.
And we can feel crazy in our grief. And so the importance of having a grief counselor, not just a general counselor, but somebody who's really trained in grief, is that there are a lot of ways that none of us, I couldn't possibly touch on all of them during this time with you today, but there's so many ways that grief presents itself that if you hear about that when you're in grief, you're going to say, okay, I'm
that
not
makes
crazy.
Sense. Yeah,
right.
Not crazy.
The second way that a grief counselor can help you is to give you practical strategies and tools of coping. So let me share with you as an example one thing that I might do with someone. It's very important to build a support system. There's one truth about grief in that there's a saying that grief rearranges your address book. Certain names will leave your little book of close friends and confidants, and certain little angels will be introduced into that book. And having that support system, inevitably in grief, we're surprised by the people who are coming and going in that book. So the people often who are closest to us, ironically in our grief, are sometimes the least available to us to help. Because one, they may be also grieving. They may be sharing in grief as well. Two, they're so close to us that they're suffering and struggling with seeing us hurting, and that almost that impatience that it can present like impatience can come out. Right. So what a grief counselor can do is to help you identify some ways to build a support system. I'll give you an example. So one thing I have some people do is to put their hand down on a piece of paper and trace their hand. And you're left with, remember we all did that as kids when we made turkeys at Thanksgiving?
Plates, yeah.
Right. And inside of each finger, I'll have them write an emotion that they're aware of experiencing in grief. It could be sadness. It could be guilt. So all of these things could one on a different one for every finger. Usually anger gets the middle finger. That's usually what happens.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's right.
Okay, I get it.
So there you go. So at the top of that emotion, of that finger, I ask people to put a name associated with that emotion, somebody they could turn to if they were experiencing that. So for example, I have a wonderful friend when it comes to my friend Amy. She would be the person I would call if I had, and I'm being facetious here, committed some horrible crime, and I needed to flee the country. She'd be like, okay, first you're going to get your passport.
Here's what you need to do.
She's there with me if I'm feeling like overwhelmed.
Yeah.
She will help me break it down. She's not the person I would go to if I were feeling guilty about something. Her strengths are elsewhere. She wouldn't quite know what to do to me to help me emotionally. She's a great strategist, though. She'd help me lay a strategy. So if I forget that Amy's good if I'm feeling overwhelmed, but not if I'm feeling guilty, and I go to her when I'm feeling guilty, one way or another, Amy will remind me, nope, she's not the person for that particular finger. So I help people, and it can be that one person shows up more than once, but
Sure.
what we inadvertently do in our grief is that we rely on one person, our best friend or our spouse.
For all of it.
For all of it. And there's no way that one person can handle equally well all of these different emotions and experiences that we're having. So somebody like a grief counselor can help you with very practical strategies and tools to get through that process of grief. And by through, I mean as long as that takes.
As long as it takes, because
Yes.
there is no term. There
That's
is
right.
no time
There's no
limit.
expiration date on
No.
grief.
Oh, no, there isn't.
That's right. So practical strategies, as well as somebody who is impartial enough. They're not mixed up in the details in your world like a close friend or a relative would be. But they also are not going to ever tire of hearing about your experience. It's not just because you're paying them. It's
Right.
because that's what they do. They're in that profession, like I am in this profession, because I love it. It's a passion. It's a privilege. And I want to be there with someone. Someone once described me, and it was so kind, I've never forgotten it, as it's not, she said, it's not that you... I think she said, it's not that you saved me from grief. I still had to go through it, but you were by my side with a compass. And she said, so you helped me find my way by walking alongside me. So
what a great testament to what the work you do.
It was a lovely way for her to describe just the experience, and that's why on my literature I say you don't have to go through it alone. The grief, yes, the grief is yours to have. Mm-hmm. I can't unfortunately take that on for you, but you don't have to be alone in that experience. So those are the main things that a grief counselor can do. Give you that space and that time and that opportunity to talk about everything that you're experiencing, give you practical ways to cope and to normalize that experience when you're feeling like it's just crazy.
Help you get through
and
normalize it. It's so important. You've been a great, as I've already alluded to, you've been a great help to me in my process. It's only been 4 months now. Mm-hmm. And some days it feels like it was just yesterday. So I've appreciated all you've done. So I want to help you get the word out to other people so that you can help other people. Tell people how they can find you.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that my name is Rachel Weinstein. You can call me directly at area code 408-540-4950. That would be the first way. I have a domain site. I'm changing it and building it. So I would say for now that's the best way to reach me. The center where I work is called the Jacksonville Center for Grief and Loss. Okay. But for now, all you need to know is my name and my phone number. I work from 5 or 5:30. Sometimes people can't leave work early enough, so I wanted to make my hours available for people who are working during the day. After hours, Monday through Friday, and I also have weekend hours. Okay. So I'm keeping in mind those people, and I have other. As you mentioned, I work for the AgeWell Center for Senior Health, and I'm really excited about the work that I do there. So that's my daytime job. I understand other people have daytime jobs too, and so I want to be there for those people after hours.
It's actually great that you're doing it after hours, because I have a friend who reminded me once, Tula, people don't grieve in the normal 9 to 5 hours when counselors are available.
That's right.
Typically.
Exactly.
People grieve all the time.
That's right.
I don't expect you to be available at 2 o'clock in the morning, but to have somebody after hours, say from 5 to 8 or whatever, would be so helpful to so many people.
That's right. I have I'm glad that you feel that way, and that's one of the one of my missions is to be able to be accessible for people after hours. And as well, I recognize that not everybody can come to my office, which is in the San Marco area. It's in the Emirates building, Emirates Bank building right near Ruth Chris Steakhouse.
Okay.
So I will also, on occasion or as needed, go to where someone is. For example, somebody may be struggling with a loss of health. So somebody could be grieving while they're not well,
Right.
and I want to be able to support them, so I can go to, and it's a case-by-case basis, but I can often go to where they are. I'm also available for phone consultation and support. Not everybody who listens to this program lives in the Jacksonville area.
Right.
So if you need support and you don't know of a grief counselor in your area, I do want to encourage people, of course, to utilize a community hospice and palliative associates.
Palliative care, because we do have,
Palliative care.
community hospice does have grief counselors as well.
Right. Exactly.
But you know what? We're not always the right fit for everyone.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
happy that we're doing this show today.
Right.
And again, this is going to be broadcast nationwide, worldwide. So if you're anywhere, in America and you want to pick up the phone and call Rachel, I can vouch for the fact that she is a wonderful grief counselor. And I'm sure over the phone she could help you the way she's helped me over the phone and in person. So Rachel, what's that phone number again?
408-540-4950.
One more time for those who are writing.
Okay. 408-540-4950.
This has been a great discussion today on a topic, again, that's just not all that easy to talk about. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for your time. More importantly, thank you for your passion for helping people who are grieving.
It's a privilege. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Caregivers, we talked about a tough topic today, but it's a topic we will all face at some point, like Rachel said, and our goal is to be there for you, to be a resource for you. You can find out more about resources at my website, TULASTipsForCaregivers.com, TOULAS, tipsforcaregivers.com. And I will be happy to, you can email me through the website, and I'll be happy to respond to you as well and help you in any way that I can. Caregivers, whether your loved one is still with you or you're grieving the loss of your loved one, I hope you are taking as good a care of yourself as you can. Again, remember, you do have to take care of yourself first. And as I wish everyone at the end of my show, many, many blessings upon you in this role as you care for someone you love. Till next time.